Welcome back to The Explainer. You ever see a political poll and wonder, how on earth do they know that? Or how a giant company seems to know exactly what you want to buy? Well, it's not a crystal ball, it's science. And today we're getting into two of the most powerful tools in a researcher's toolkit, stratified and cluster sampling. They sound kind of similar, but trust me, picking the right one can mean the difference between a game-changing discovery and a huge waste of time and money.
So let's kick things off with a massive problem. Imagine you want to understand the entire United States, what they think, what they do. You can't just go out and talk to 330 million people, right? It's literally impossible. So what's the next best thing? How do you get a picture that's actually accurate?
Well, the answer is sampling. Basically, it's the science of picking a small, manageable group that perfectly mirrors the whole population. You get this sample right, and it's like having a superpower. You can make incredibly accurate predictions. But get it wrong, and your results are worse than useless, they're flat out misleading. That's why the way you pick your sample is everything.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with a divide and conquer strategy, which is stratified sampling. Then we'll check out a more practical group and go approach called cluster sampling. After that, we'll put them side by side to really see the difference, and we'll wrap up with how to actually pick the right one for the job.
Okay, first up, stratified sampling. If you're a bit of a perfectionist and you need absolute precision, this is the method for you. It's all about making sure every single voice in a population gets heard.
So here's the big idea. You take your whole population and you slice it up into smaller, really specific subgroups. These are your strata. And you're not just making up groups for fun. They have to be based on some important shared characteristic. Things like age groups, income brackets, where people live, that kind of stuff.
Now, here's the secret sauce. Inside each of these little groups, you want everyone to be as similar as possible. That's what homogeneity means. So everyone in your under 30 group is, well, under 30. Everyone in your West Coast group lives on the West Coast. By making each group so consistent, you make your final results way more precise.
And the process itself is, you got to be honest, pretty intense. First, you figure out who you're studying. Then you decide on your strata. Then you have to take every single person in your population and put them into one and only one of those boxes. And here's the most important part. You then take a random sample from every single group. Nobody gets skipped.
This visual just nails it. See on the left, you've got this jumbled up mix of everybody. Then, in the middle, it's like they've been perfectly sorted into these neat, organized layers. It's only after that intense sorting process that you go in and pluck a few people from each and every color. It's methodical.
So what's the payoff for all that work? Well, it's huge. This method absolutely guarantees that you'll have representation from all your important subgroups, even the really small ones. This slashes your risk of sampling error and means you can confidently compare what the different groups think. It's incredibly powerful. Okay, so let's switch gears. If stratified sampling is the precision tool, our next method, cluster sampling, is all about being practical and efficient. It's a totally different way to think about the problem.
With cluster sampling, you're also putting people into groups, but with a huge difference. You're using groups that already exist out in the real world. Think about schools in a district, or hospitals in a state, or even just houses on different city blocks. These naturally occurring groups are your clusters.
And here's where we do a complete 180. Remember how with stratified, we wanted each group to be full of similar people? Well, here, you want the exact opposite. The goal is for each individual cluster to be a diverse little mini-me of the entire population. One school or one city block should ideally have a grid mix of everyone.
The process is way different, too. You figure out your population and you list out your clusters, say all the city blocks in a town. But then you don't sample from all of them. No way. You just randomly pick a few entire city blocks. And then, this is the key, you have to interview every single person who lives on the blocks you picked.
Yeah, this diagram might look a little busy, but the idea is actually super simple. The population is already in these naturally mixed groups, right? The researcher just closes their eyes, points at a few of those groups and says, you, and you. Everyone inside those chosen circles gets surveyed. Everyone else? They're not in the study at all. It's all or nothing.
So why on earth would you do this? Well, it can save you a ton of time and money. Think about surveying a whole country. Instead of flying your team to 200 different towns, you could randomly select, say, 15 towns, your clusters, and just send everyone there. It's a lifesaver when getting a list of every single person is just not going to happen.
Okay, so we've met the two contenders. Now let's put them in the ring, side by side, for a direct comparison. This is where you'll really see what makes them tick.
This table just lays it all out, doesn't it? Stratified wants its groups to be internally similar. Cluster wants them to be internally diverse. Stratified samples a few people from all the groups. Cluster samples all the people from a few groups. And that leads to the ultimate trade-off. Stratified gives you incredible precision, but it's expensive. Cluster is way easier and cheaper, but you're taking on a bigger risk of being wrong.
Let me give you an analogy. Stratified sampling is like a beautiful, multi-layered cake. To get a taste of the whole thing, you have to cut a slice that goes through every single layer. The chocolate, the vanilla, the strawberry. Cluster sampling, that's more like a big tray of cookies. You don't need a crumb from every cookie, you just grab 2 or 3 whole cookies and figure they're a good representation of the whole batch. It's slicing versus grabbing.
So at the end of the day, it really comes down to this. What do you value more, and what can you actually afford to do? Do you have the money, the time, and a complete list of everybody to pull off the high-precision stratified method? Or is your population so huge and spread out that the more practical but less perfect cluster method is your only real choice?
So, knowing all that, how in the world do you actually decide which path to take for your own project? Let's think through a real-world example. Say you're a pollster, and there's a small but really important group of voters that could swing an election. You absolutely cannot risk missing their opinion. Which method do you choose? Right. You'd go with stratified, because it forces you to go out and find people from that specific group. It gives you control. And honestly, if you're ever stuck, a tool like this decision tree is your best friend. It just walks you through the simple questions. Do you have to represent specific subgroups? Boom, you're probably leaning stratified. Is your population spread all over the map and you don't have a master list? Well, cluster sampling starts to look pretty good. It's a roadmap that leads you to the right answer.
So let's boil it all down. If you walk away with anything, make it these 3 things. Number 1, stratified is your scalpel. You use it when you need surgical precision. 2, cluster is your sledgehammer. It's for when you need to get a big, tough job done efficiently. And 3, the absolute biggest difference is what you're sampling, individuals from within all the groups or the actual groups themselves.
And there you have it, the fundamental choice every researcher has to make between getting it perfectly right and getting it done. So, I'll leave you with this. The next time you see a news report about a new poll or a big study, ask yourself, did they slice the cake or did they just grab a few cookies? Because how they answer that question tells you pretty much everything you need to know.